Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's funders call on the 2020 census and COVID-19, what funders can do to support a fair and accurate count. Now I'm going to pass it on to Stephanie Powers.
We are going to be talking about the 2020 census today, which began in earnest in mid-March, just at the same time that the COVID-19 pandemic was declared a global pandemic, and the nation began to head home and stay at home. Today, participants will hear from national and state-based philanthropic leaders to learn what's at stake with the census count, where the self-response is lagging and what that really is all about, and what the issues are in historically undercounted communities, and how practitioners are adjusting their education and outreach campaigns in the wake of COVID-19, and most importantly, how funders and those of you who are joining us today can engage on this. In this age of so many life and health priorities, I have to say that it is comforting to know that a group of our peers are really focusing on the census, because the census, as you all know, I'm sure, is mandatory under our Constitution once a year, or once every 10 years, sorry, every decade. And we are in the throes of this now, and it is about billions and billions of federal resources to be allocated to every congressional district in this country, and so the count is really, really crucial. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers today, who have been working hard on this issue for many years, and they're going to tell you a little bit about that too. So Jocelyn Bissonnette is going to be the moderator of the rest of the conversation. She's the director of the Funders Census Initiative with the Funders Committee for Civic Participation. Stefania Ramirez is the director of strategic initiatives at the California Community Foundation. And Jerry Mannion is the director of the Strengthening Democracy Program and Special Opportunities Fund at Carnegie Corporation of New York. And so we're going to have some conversation, some presentation by our speakers, and at the end of that, then we will have an opportunity for a Q&A, which I will come back on and moderate. But for now, I'm going to take myself off the camera and turn this over to Jocelyn and to all of our presenters. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that framing and introduction. Just a word about my organization, the Funder Census Initiative at FCCP. We've been working for several years to help mobilize philanthropy to participate, convene, and invest towards a fair and accurate census, all with a focus on historically undercounted communities. And of course, none of this work happens alone or in silos. We've done this by serving as a resource hub, by partnering and supporting the work of the Democracy Funders Collaborative Census Subgroup, and by helping to conduct outreach to state and community-based funders in coordination with the United Philanthropy Forum. The 2020 census serves as a critical building block for our democracy for the next decade, and so we're really grateful to Stephanie, Manuela, and the whole team at the Council on Foundations for their engagement and for hosting this important and timely discussion. I would be remiss if I didn't begin with a reminder that if you haven't already completed your 2020 census, to please do so. At this point, you should have received the initial request and 2 responses in the mail. You can complete it in just a couple of minutes over the phone, online, or through the paper questionnaire. And that probably won't be the last reminder that you'll hear throughout today's presentation. And finally, I just want to say another note about our 2 speakers today, who I'm really privileged to be part of the discussion with. Jerry and Stefania are and have been leaders and advocates for the 2020 census within their institutions and at the national, state, and local level. Jerry has helped inform the National Funders Collaborative Strategy going back to 2015. Stefania serves on the FCI leadership team and has been informing all of our work. Their proactive and responsive approach really reflects the unprecedented engagement we've seen from philanthropy in the 2020 census cycle, the importance of which has come into even clearer focus given the increased challenges and uncertainty that we faced in the last couple of weeks. So while we're going to focus today on the impact, what impact the COVID-19 has had on census, I want to go back to start at the beginning because I think it's an important foundation for the rest of our conversation. And as Stephanie already mentioned, we know that the census is critical for philanthropy, for accurate data, the fair distribution of resources and political representation, as well as the organizations and partners that we support. And that we do this work with a focus on historically undercounted communities, including communities of color, low-income communities, immigrant and mixed status households, households with limited English proficiency, and young children. But this work was really initiated back in 2015. And so, Jerry, I'm hoping that we can start with you to talk a little bit about the establishment of the National Funders Collaborative, what that looked like, and really how that informed the unprecedented engagement from both philanthropy and practitioners that we're understanding to be even critically more important in this moment. So let me turn it over to you to kick us off.
Appreciate very much. Oh, can you hear me now? Yeah. All right. Thank you again, Jocelyn, and I appreciate very much being here today. I hate to admit it, but this is my fourth census I have been involved with since I came to Carnegie. And Carnegie has always seen it as part of its engagement in democracy issues, that census is just as much a part of our civic continuum as, in fact, is voter engagement, voting rights, protections, and other aspects of our democracy. As Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, this is a constitutional requirement. It is one that we should take seriously, but I will admit that it is also one of the more challenging issues. It happens only once a decade, and it's just as important and hard to remind the public about the census and the importance of the census as it is around philanthropy. Philanthropy, because of so much of the turnover that occurs in a decade, you often have to start again from scratch to remind people why the census is important. You know, it is because of the census that $8 trillion is distributed over a 10-year period for a whole range of social and issues that happen. And that's certainly dealing with the pandemic. We know about our public health facilities, our education facilities, school meals for children who are under the poverty level. All of that is distributed to states and localities based on your census data. In addition, it's how businesses make their decisions. It's how, in fact, redistricting is done after the census, how we, in fact, engage around our political alignment post-census. And even before the pandemic occurred, this was always going to be a challenging census. It was going to be the first census that was going to occur at a time when it was going to be online predominantly. It was also going to be one that had funding limits, and it also had, in fact, a lot of fear factor put into it. And that more than likely was one of the reasons that we thought as a group of funders to get ahead of it. So the Census Funders Initiative began in actually 2015 to start discussing about how to do outreach. And it's been, you know, phenomenally successful. And it's, I think, an excellent example of how foundations, both national, regional, and state and local, can work collectively toward fixing a problem that we know is coming and to really engage about it in advance. Often philanthropy is in the middle of the mess before it gets to starting to think about it. Here we actually thought about it 5 years out, and that's paid off. To date, the Census Funders Initiative has raised close to $85 million from philanthropy and has leveraged close to $350 million from governments and others that would not have put funding in if it wasn't for the advocacy by many on this panel, in fact. I think the last thing I'll say before I stop talking is that there's still this challenge with the pandemic is, you know, it puts us at the same sort of level of expanding the field operations of now the census through October 31st, 3 days before the November elections. I mean, never before have we seen our groups that on the ground, and there's so many of them, state, local, and national, who are going to have to pivot directly, and I shouldn't even say pivot. They thought they were going to pivot. Now they're going to actually have to be doing both outreach around the vote, and getting people to turn out and vote, as well as doing the census at the same time.
Great, thanks, Jerry. And I want to provide a little bit more context about where we are in the count. So I'm going to provide just a couple of facts and figures, and then talk a little bit about the success we had on Census Reference Day on April 1. So as of yesterday, 49.1% of US households had responded to the 2020 census. The census experts that have been conducting this analysis to this point haven't found any direct correlation between the impact of where the virus is having the greatest impact and census self-response rates, but they are monitoring to see if there are any patterns or trends that would emerge that would allow us to draw some sort of correlation. We're working with census experts, including the folks at the CUNY Hard to Count map, who are producing a weekly analysis of self-response. And so I want to provide a couple of the latest statistics to give you a sense of where we are. And I'm going to go back a week so that the statistics I give you are a little in alignment with another. We're waiting on the latest set of information, which we should have later today. So as of April 9th, the US response rate was 46.7%. But that's just the national rate. We know that there is really uneven self-response across geography and within different demographies. So a couple of examples to highlight that. Households that are in tracts with no home internet access, the response rate within that same time period was only 21%. Response rates for tracts with very high risk of undercounting young children, only 40%. Census tracts that are predominantly Hispanic in large cities, only 35.9%. Tracts with a predominantly Black population in cities greater than 1 million, only 34.9%. And tracts with predominantly Asian populations in large cities of over 1 million, only 38.8%. So, and generally, we're still pretty far behind where we were at this point in 2010. And although the comparisons between 2010 and 2020 aren't exact, to the point that Jerry made about how operationally the census is much different, there are lots of other different political environment that's really impacting the willingness of people to participate. It is one good barometer and one good motivator that many organizations are using to help increase outreach and help demonstrate the progress that we are making. And one point of progress that is really worth mentioning is the really successful April 1 Census Reference Day that we had a couple of weeks ago, from the virtual town halls and Twitter storms to the digital dance parties. We really collectively and successfully raised the profile of the importance of participating in the 2020 census, and the adaptability and flexibility and creativity and resiliency of organizations as they've had to make major adjustments to their operations was really inspiring. And even more important, it made a difference. So on April 1, there were tens of millions of census awareness impressions on social media, and the one-day self-response rate increase of 2.9% not only surpassed the 2010 one-day census day increase, but was the biggest day-to-day increase so far in 2020. So it was a really important moment for funders and practitioners to really celebrate the work and use it as a motivating and jumping off point for the long road that we have ahead to really complete this count. So sort of bringing us back to where we are today, we know that the impact of the virus has forced funders as well as their grantees and practitioners to make really significant adjustments. And so, Stefania, let me bring you in to start us off to talk about, what has your institution done? How have California funders thought about and made adjustments? And really, what has this mean for the organizations on the ground that you're supporting?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Stefania Ramirez, California Community Foundation. So thank you, Jocelyn. So COVID-19 has really forced us to change our course of action on the ground, not just for myself as a community foundation, one of the oldest community foundations in the nation. We participated and supported in census outreach in 2010, and we were ready for 2020. We knew it was going to be a historic effort. Nonetheless, never could we have anticipated this. We started sort of field planning since 2017. And as a community foundation, for the first time, and at the request of our groups, our community-based organizations, we served as an ACBO for the state. So we accepted state dollars as well as philanthropic resources, and we created a pooled fund to support groups. What we are, we were ready to go. We focused based on the data and based on historic trends. We focus on really supporting canvassing efforts and special events. We had a whole campaign built out, I can talk, and we were ready to go. And people were already, by the way, doing all these efforts before we were hit with this. So once COVID-19 happened, we've had to shift the course of at least 125 organizations that were, funded to do this type of outreach in a very quick time to sort of come up with virtual strategies where they can continue their outreach, their census outreach. And that's been quite a lift. It's been quite a lift for us internally as a foundation and as a campaign team, having to, sort of create and roll out these strategies. While a lot of these things, some of them we knew, like phone banking and text banking, we knew we were going to be doing that, and we were starting to activate those. Having to do it in a really quick time frame, it's been a challenge. Additionally, the groups on the ground are themselves, facing operational challenges. They're raising like issues around, yes, Stephanie, I know that, you want us to focus on census, and we are still, we still want to do this work. We still want to commit to do this. However, we're facing issues of sustainability. We don't know if as an organization, we're going to exist next month. We're struggling with payroll. We're struggling with other things. But I've been really impressed, all that sort of set aside, I've been really impressed with the creativity, the resiliency, the agility of our groups, and a lot of us here on this call today who are nevertheless continue to be committed to get out the count activities. So I just wanted to sort of share that. We have been sort of transitioning into creating webinars and training series of everything around how to organize digitally. So how do you even host Zoom calls, and how can you use Zoom calls to engage others and to also coordinate census outreach? So like what the CUNY is doing on a weekly basis at a national level, we are also doing it here in the context of LA County, in partnership with the Advancement Project California. We're doing the same sort of level of analysis for our region. And then we have weekly meetings with our regional leads so that they are coordinating amongst each other on what can we do. We have these census tracks that continue to show, low response rates. What can we do creatively to sort of reach those communities? While also, it's important, I do want to balance it out. It's also important to remember that there's also great progress when we compare it to 2010 in terms of where we are, in spite of the pandemic. So really raising that visibility. There are very interesting, stories that and trends that we're starting to see that unfortunately are not rising, because we're also focused on, wow, our numbers are low collectively. So what can we do? So we've been working on those pieces on sort of providing technical assistance support to the groups, as well as, developing a series of trainings and webinars about phone banking and text banking, and, working on creating phone banking scripts that they can use in multiple languages, creating targeted outreach lists. What we're hearing now from a lot of groups is, there are like any in any sort of ecosystem, there are the organizations that are equipped and ready and say, okay, I got it, I can do this. but there's a lot more that are saying, wow, you gave us this grant because we were going to do door-to-door knocking, or we were going to host all these special events. Now you're asking us to pivot into phone and text banking. And while, yes, we want all these resources and we want to learn, there is a learning curve. There's a learning curve, and there's also the challenges of it's going to take us a while. And our list, even when you talk about sort of making phone calls to hundreds of people, our context lists, they're not that big. We're talking about lists of 2,000, 5,000. How do we, once we have our staff make those calls, what happens next? How do we get access to bigger lists so that we can really keep calling? And again, we keep people employed. Those are sort of real challenges that we're hearing from groups. So we've been working at looking into that and to buying lists so that we can augment. So there's the work that we have done as a result of COVID-19, and all of these resources, by the way, the ones that I'm talking about, they're all available on WeCountLA.org. They're all edible and anybody can use them. I mean, they're part of, our work, but I'm happy to provide it to everyone here. But I do want to sort of step back and also say that that was our response to COVID-19. Now, with the most recent announcement from the US Census Bureau about extending the timeline, we're being asked to pivot again. That is another, big sort of bomb that was sort of thrown at us right now. And we are having to think, and all the groups are asking the right questions. At what point, is this going to stop, and at what point will we get additional resources if you want us to continue to do this level of outreach at this level of intensity? And by the way, we had planned on working on Get Out the Vote. So those were other campaigns that we were sort of layering in. Which is the priority? How do we start to, sync them in, if any? Which brings its own can of worms. And so those are now the challenges that I would say I don't have answers to. We're grappling with right now.
That's great, and I think we'll come back in a moment to the Census Bureau's announcement this week and sort of dig in a little bit more about that means. I do want to lift up something you said earlier, which I think is important. Your reference to the resources that are on your website and how available and accessible they are for people to use and to refine based on their own needs. I think one of the things that we've seen throughout this census work among funders, between funders and their grantees, among national and state-based practitioners, is just the extent of collaboration. And I think that you've lifted up a really great example of that, and I think that has been really emblematic of this work more broadly. And so I do really want to lift that up as another success of this work. But Jerry, let me go to you, sort of going back 2 weeks before we got this announcement from the Census Bureau, which we'll talk more about. What has been the adjustments and the shift in strategy that national funders are thinking about how to make sure that organizations have the resources and capacity they need to start making these adjustments, given so much of the in-person work has moved to digital?
Yeah. Just the one thing I would say before, also just to follow on Stefania, her remarks, that the thing that I think we were all learning as funders around the world, around the country, is about the digital divide. And I think that's something we cannot overstate. So many of our groups are working in areas and frankly, with equipment that is not adequate. We work in foundations where I have a nice IT team. I'm well spaced here to do my work, and I'm not concerned about it. Many of our grantees don't have Wi-Fi hotspots. They have limited numbers of laptops. They have limited equipment. Many of the folks were telling, since it is an online census, that they were hoping people would go to the local community college or the local library and use their equipment to fill out the online census forms. All those are closed now. So having the ability to sort of really think about the digital is, I think, something that as funders, we have to think long and hard about, not just now, but going into the future, especially if you want folks to be up to speed digitally and to be able to adequately do the work. I think like many other funders on this call probably, and around, you know, Carnegie as a national funder, we do a lot of general operating support. And so we had, many of our groups were given that flexibility from the start. And many of them, frankly, were giving the funding for this last year and 2 years that was talked about, actually, the pivot from census to civic engagement, because that's been such a long time part of our work. But a lot, and we're trying to be as flexible as possible as well with, you know, project grants that have been making them more general operating, you know, being a lot less strict about reporting, you know, making it as easy as possible on the grantees to do the work. Luckily, because of the Census Funders Initiative and the ability to raise so much money in advance, we do have some money, not a huge amount, but some money is set aside for what we perceived as emergency get out the count efforts. And one of the good things about mapping this out with CUNY and others, we will be able to look around, and we're making grants to the Census Equity Fund, which we're happy to share info, is that we can actually put some additional resources into those communities that are showing that the least likely their people are being counted. And that, frankly, will continue probably to be in rural areas, in communities with immigrants or Latino, with folks who are, you know, are low income, hard to count folks that have always been difficult. But frankly, it's also going to be rural. And one thing I didn't state, and it's hard to know who exactly, which funders are on across the country. You should note that of the money that I mentioned about states putting money into census, it's only 29 states of the 50. You know, a lot of states have put no money into census count, and a lot of those states don't have a lot of philanthropy. So one of the things that the Census Equity Fund was doing as well was trying to match up where there was real shortages of funding even before this happened, and now hopefully to fill in any gaps. So I just want to make a plea, as those of you out there, if you haven't made any grants as yet on census, there's plenty of time and plenty of opportunity. And as Stephania and Jocelyn both said, we are not out there to recreate the wheel. Any materials that are being created, anybody can put their name, logo, et cetera, on them. They can be downloaded, they can be pushed out. You know, our point is now to make this as successful as possible, because we don't get a do-over with the census. Like, we will not be able to fix the numbers next year. Whatever happens now, between now and October 31st, is the numbers we have to live with for 10 years down the line. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to what Jerry just shared around the digital divide, and also sources of funding, how critical it's been for philanthropy to step in and to really provide support for census outreach, especially during this time. If we had not, again, we are one of the, I guess, lucky organizations or states to have had state funding, state support. But with that state funding and support also comes a lot of restrictions and a pretty much very crystal clear understanding that there's going to be an ROI, right? And so thanks to the funds that, you know, foundations have been able to support, to provide to these activities, we have been able to provide flexibility as challenges arise. As Jerry shared, you know, loosening or being more flexible on reporting conditions, allowing, you know, the changing of categories within the budget, give full discretion, you make the choice. So I just wanted to uplift that, because I also think I know, you know, we've been working at a national level and also at a regional level here in California. We also have a statewide funders initiative. And so that table has also been encouraging and to a degree educating at the beginning our other peers in the foundation world on why providing support to census is essential. And so if anything, this pandemic also demonstrates the urgency in which philanthropy has been able to respond and can continue to respond, unlike, unfortunately, our government partners sometimes.
Great.
Yeah, if we really had not been, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, if we would not been doing this for the last 5 years, we would be so screwed, because we would be in no way able to come into this pandemic and respond if we had not had the planning and collaboration that's gone on. And I'm talking collaboration from the biggest nonprofits to those smallest. They have really, how many people, Jocelyn, are on those calls? We can have 200 people on a call, census call every quarterly, as well as that many people in a room in Washington or when we were able to travel. There has been such commitment from around the country of people really willing to, and funders, as well as nonprofits, to get this right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And so I want to make sure we've referenced multiple times now this big announcement from the Census Bureau on Monday. So I want to dig into that a little bit more. What we know is that the Census Bureau, in order to protect the health and safety of the American public as well as their workforce, announced an additional delay to field operations. So they won't be restarting those field operations, which is the in-person delivery of materials, the in-person enumeration, the in-person follow-up to households that were prompted to respond online or over the phone but haven't done so. So all that is being put on hold until June 1st. In addition, the Census Bureau has requested from Congress a delay in the 2 statutory reporting deadlines that it has. One at the end of this December to provide the population totals to the president for the purposes of apportionment. The second, by the end of April, the Census Bureau is supposed to provide the redistricting files to states so that states can implement their redistricting processes. So we're not sure, that Congress hasn't taken that up at this moment, but the Census Bureau has requested a delay in those 2 statutory deadlines in order for the Census Bureau to extend the end of the count from the end of July to the end of October. This has been a challenging issue. We know that, we've seen a number of civil rights groups express support for this delay. We've seen a number of Census Bureau directors express support for this delay. It's certainly a complicated issue because the more that you extend the census, the more questions about the workforce, questions about recall bias, whether or not people can remember accurately what the composition of their household was on April 1. Questions about what the composition is of those households, whether or not people have moved or their situations are different, and questions about equity. Is the data collection process consistent across geographies over time? And what does that mean in particular for communities who are historically undercounted, communities, particularly rural and remote and tribal communities who have yet to receive their census information? So this is a very complicated situation that requires the thought partnership not just of philanthropy and federal agencies and the civil rights community, but statisticians and many others. And it also raises questions for us as philanthropy about what this means for our practitioners in terms of their capacity, in terms of our resources. We've covered some of that already today. But Jerry and Stephanie, I just want to sort of open this up about, we're still all processing and grappling the news and figuring out what it means, since we just learned this on Monday. But would just love your thoughts and insights about how you're thinking about this. What are the opportunities and challenges that you foresee with this updated operational timeline?
Do you want to go first, Stephanie? Or you want me? Okay, I'll jump in. I'll say that one of the things I think, I'm a person who likes to make lemonade out of lemons. So on the good side, on the good thing is, because we are all having to stay in place for the most part, other than the essential workers, we can be, I think having the public outreach as much as possible, the ad campaign has been great. I've seen so many ads about the census. The thing about encouraging people, it couldn't be easier in any time to fill out your census forms. You can do it by mail, you can do it online, and you can do it by phone. So I think we should continuously hope that that can move forward. And hopefully some of the media that, you know, is doing a lot of great public service about updating us on COVID-19 in our cities and states, could also be lending some of their resources as well in multiple languages to our, to providing more PSAs and public service announcements. I think the other issue is that, and what you didn't mention, I mean, we dodged a huge bullet last year with the Supreme Court saying that we did not have to put the citizenship question on the census form. But so many immigrant communities are still fearful of that. So that is a real obstacle still, and we need more and more people to reach out specifically to those communities to say, do not be afraid. It is against the law to give away your census information, and that you, in fact, should feel free to give it is your duty to really give the census report back in. And then, frankly, our groups, I think they are, nonprofits are the most resilient organizations. And I think this is a hugely important election for many reasons. It has, it's going to be one that's going to be very challenged in and of itself, as we all now are going to potentially, every state's going to have to try to do absentee and vote by mail. So maybe, making sure that our organizations could potentially be prepped to say, we are going to have to do it again together. We're going to have to do census, and we're going to have to do voter engagement. And we're going to hopefully ask for a philanthropy to dig a little deeper and support those efforts. And if you haven't, put funding out as well for their voter engagement activity, all nonpartisan, by the way, they could certainly add money for census as well at this time. Stephanie?
Great. So,
Great. No, so Jerry, thank you for your comment around making lemonade out of lemons and stuff. Definitely agree. And I think for us, the way I've been seeing this campaign is, agility is our North Star. More than ever, we're just going to have to be creative. And there are things that we can do. Again, this is where we also have to think about mailers, think about, other ways where we collectively can continue to build a message and a consistent drumbeat across different platforms. That being said, I do want to I do want to share that I still don't know. I'm still sort of thinking this through and trying to figure out what this means for us. And when I say for us, I'm concerned about all these nonprofits that, we're sort of trying to guide. It does have repercussions. Some of the things that I'm concerned about is that statisticians, demographers, census experts are saying the longer this takes, the longer we have extensions of data of the census timeline, the data quality and the accuracy also decreases. So on one side, I'm thinking through things like that. On another, I'm also thinking the financial implications that this has. Recognizing that a lot of funders, including myself, I mean, we are giving to COVID-19 relief funds. We're sort of supporting that front. So all of the reserves that we've had now, have gone into direct services. And so with that, and I know several funders around the country are doing the same thing. So if philanthropy stepped out, if our states, across the nation are also sort of dealing with these challenges themselves and are also digging in their pockets to sort of support emergency relief efforts in hospitals, with our communities, where can we tap into additional resources? So that is a concern, because I know that at some point the groups will also say, I'm tired, not just do we need more resources, but I'm tired. Like this is we're definitely pushing, and it's a weekly push, so I just want to share some thoughts or some observations in terms of the things that I'm, again, still thinking through and still thinking about, whatever mechanisms we develop, if it is, for example, we have a digital outreach strategy where we're sending targeted, ads via cell phones to groups, we can keep investing on that. But recognizing that the more we invest on pieces like that, the more we also, and we do it for the groups or with the groups, the more it's also taking resources from other places. So it's a give and take. I'm sort of still working through those pieces. So just wanted to be sort of frank with some of the things that I'm hearing and sort of monitoring and tracking.
No, that's all. Those are all really helpful insights, and I think again we can all appreciate that we're all trying to process this news and what it means for our own institutions, what it means for our collective work together, for the organizations that we partner with and support. So we're going to move to Q&A in a moment, but before we do, I just want to give you an opportunity to for funders that may be participating in this call who haven't funded census, that may not traditionally fund civic engagement work, what would you say to them? What would be your call to action to them in this moment about how they can engage?
Yeah, I do think that, as funders, as community-based organizations, there's so many, and we all have our context. We all send consistent sort of updates. And now more than ever, we're also saying, here's what we're tracking from our public health officials around COVID, making sure that we always insert an action item or tips on what they can do, and census being at the forefront of that. So any, again, newsletter or message from the president or message from staff should always include like a census reminder. That's something easy that we can all sort of implement. Making sure that, as we talk, even in your grant agreements, if there's any way that we can even say, can you confirm, or can you, sign here, and also make sure that you inform your staff of the importance of the census. I mean, again, it's having to be sort of creative, but those are small things that I think we can all sort of easily implement.
And I would just add to that, and I recognize all the challenges. There's no doubt about it. I think that's more than true. But I guess what I would say to folks who have not yet invested in census, that, and I've done it usually from the civic engagement perspective, as the democracy perspective. But, if you're an education funder, if you are a healthcare funder, if you're an economic development funder, if you are a workers' rights funder, if you care about children under 5, one of the most undercounted in the last census, more than 5% of children under 5 were undercounted. If you worry about people of color and other disadvantaged communities, you should be funding the census, because at some point it's going to impact whether they have the tools and the social services in their communities, in your communities, and actually to really do what they need to do. If the census is wrong, philanthropy ends up paying for it, 25 million times over more, because we won't have the resources at the community level to do it. So now, if you can do it, and I think there are folks that might be able to provide, say, some of the tech supporters. They could be providing more access to technology and digital lists and all kinds of stuff, training. I think there's a lot people can still do. And I know it's difficult, but, to dig a little deeper, otherwise we're paid for it for the next decade.
Yeah, I also want to uplift something that I heard yesterday. I know we've talked in this call about the digital divide, and so one of the things that we're consistently hearing, and this is not just in California, this is across the nation, is that folks don't have resources to Wi-Fi. There's different tiers of Wi-Fi too, and so to do this level of work. This is also, if you're a community foundation or a funder, or again, or also a nonprofit that has a policy link or department, this is where we can all sort of mobilize too and start to say, these are necessities that I know that there's here in California, there's conversations about starting to push for Wi-Fi access to be granted to all students and teachers, so that just home teaching can continue. And so when I heard that, I was like, actually, it shouldn't just be for education funders sort of talking about this, and it shouldn't just be for the school systems. We should think broadly. This is a pandemic. We're in unprecedented times. So this could be, I'm just throwing an idea, but yesterday that was a conversation that I was having with my peers, and thinking again creatively about big wins that can have big impacts in terms of making sure that we can all sort of contribute to get out the count activities.
Well, I think that's
So
a
one last
great,
thing,
yeah, please, Jerry, go ahead.
I'm just sorry. Most public housing in this country has no Wi-Fi access. You know, think about that. I mean, if you want people then to be able to really be able to utilize all these different tools, et cetera. I mean, folks need to understand. I think it's going to be one of our next challenges is to make sure this doesn't ever happen again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that this is a sort of the big picture note, I think, is a really good one to end on, and really thinking about, you know, a grant that is for an organization to do census work, or general operating grant, can ultimately be about helping to sustain and build the capacity and resiliency of the organizations and communities that that we care about, and just the interconnectedness of all of this work. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. I really enjoyed facilitating this part of the discussion. And I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Great, thank you very much, Jocelyn. And yes, we do have a couple of questions, and I actually was taking down some questions that I needed to have answered. So I just wonder if, just really quickly, could you just explain again what the extension is until the end of October? What does that actually mean? Does that mean are there going to be any door knockers at all during that period of time? Do you know?
Jerry or Stephanie, do you want to take that one?
I don't think we know yet. I mean, there definitely were people hired and trained, and even that's going on. I mean, but the fact is that, you know, until people lift the, you know, the holds on most states, people are not going to be sending folks out into the field. You know, hopefully if this improves over the summer, that might help. And frankly, up until this point, up and before COVID hit and unemployment rose so high, people were having trouble finding enumerators even to hire. And they were paying pretty well. In Jersey City, where I live, they were paying $22 an hour. But you'd still have to hire those workers and get them out. And they're going to be prioritizing, I would assume, rural areas, Native American communities, places where it's much more difficult to get people to return the forms online.
So I'll also jump in here. From what the U.S. Census Bureau released, they would start to open the new sort of timeline that, you know, that they shared is field offices would reopen on June 1st so that they can continue doing the hiring, and enumerators can start sort of knocking on doors mid-August. And then ultimately the self-response period, whether it's which includes the non-response follow-up, so broadly self-response via, you know, via email, online, via phone, or via paper, can be all sort of done by October 31st. So I'm not sure if that helps clarify, but that's sort of the information, the key dates that we've been given from the U.S. Census Bureau.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Somebody did ask, and I think, Stephanie, this might be for you based on something you had mentioned, and that is where you got, how you got hold of the list, the telephone contact for calling and texting.
Sure. We really just went out there and researched it. We knew, for example, PDI, Political Data Institute, at least in the state of California, you know, we have partnered with them, and they have a state contract to sort of anybody sort of doing phone banking or outreach can sort of use this platform to track their outreach. And so with that, we looked at their list. And then we also explored other vendors. I'm happy to share that sort of what we did and sort of the approach. We just literally sort of consolidate all the questions that I was getting from the field and sort of started to see the trends, and then figured, okay, if PDI provides me this, what are other vendors out there that can provide more or the same? What are the differences? What are the differences in cost? What are the differences also in the support that I could get from, you know, these vendors in terms of also, you know, the challenges of then splitting the list and putting them out there. So yes, I'm still sort of working through that, but I do have that little sort of analysis done.
Mm-hmm. Great. And it sounds actually kind of similar to the way political campaigns work in terms of getting those phone numbers so that they can make those phone calls, all those wonderful
Yep.
robo kind of calls that we get about, your local candidate running for office. Yeah, somebody else has asked, and I think maybe Jocelyn, you have been working with us to do this for our follow-up email for everybody who registered. But someone asked where they can get the examples of a funder communication to their grantees. So maybe some specific examples would be good, and what tools have you all already put together that we can just ship out to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll provide our contact information following the webinar. We'll also provide the contact information for Gary Bass at the Bauman Foundation, who chairs the National Funder Collaborative. His counterpart Amy Dominguez Arms, who's overseeing the Census Equity Fund that Jerry mentioned. And we'll also provide a link to the Census Counts homepage. The Census Counts campaign is the national practitioner resource hub, and they have a wealth of resources that your grantees and practitioners can easily plug into and adapt. They have a whole series of digital trainings, and they are increasing their help desk capacity and the digital training series. So especially for organizations that are looking to continue making adjustments to their education and outreach from in-person activity, there are a wealth of resources, scripts, trainings, templates, messaging guidance that we can be sure to connect you with.
I just, as I was thinking about the comment that I think, Stephanie, you might have made about always adding something about the census to any communication that foundations are sending out, right? Put it on your websites, put it on your signatures. I mean, and I was thinking, what about, since we have a lot of community foundations on the call, I wonder if maybe some little, starburst on the Giving Tuesday pages, which Giving Tuesday is coming up, and that might be a good place to put a message and a link,
That
to
would
go.
be great.
Yeah.
Yes.
More. So I throw that out there for all the community foundations that are on the phone, or I mean on the call. A couple of other quick questions. Could you just clarify again about undocumented immigrants, and do they qualify to be counted?
Yes. Yes, this is Jerry. There is absolutely, the whole thing about I always use the same example, just so you know, is that the reason Jesus was born in a manger was he was on his way to be counted. I mean, it's everybody has to be counted. It doesn't ask for any status. It should not ask for any status. People live in all kinds of mixed family homes where their children might be American citizens. I mean, one partner may be documented, the other one may not. So absolutely, everybody should be counted on the day of.
Great. Yes. Okay. Very good. I have another quick question. That is, can there be any corrections made after the fact, or once the count is done, it's done? I think I heard you say that, but they go back and they change in economic numbers, they change unemployment numbers to the next month, they adjust them, they say. Is this possible at all for the census?
So
Joshua,
for
you want to do it?
Yeah, the short answer is no. There are for some federal programs, for example, there are more local data or up data that can be provided. So in some cases, yes. For the purposes of political reapportionment, no. The census count is the final count. That is the population total that is used for reapportionment. That has been challenged all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Census Bureau cannot use statistical sampling to correct or improve the accuracy of the count. So for the purposes of political apportionment, that's why it's so important that we get the best and most fair and accurate count possible, because that number is set in stone.
And just to maybe wind up, I thought maybe we could finish up a little bit with redistricting. So I'm glad you brought that up. So wearing my political hat, I would think that there should be some members of Congress out there that are really concerned about getting an accurate count. considering that in redistricting, they could be redistricted right out of Congress if the count is not accurate. So is there any kind of, collective movement at all representing the interests of maybe members of Congress? Are there any, who are the champions? Any comment that you might like to make about that before we wind this up?
So I can't speak for members of Congress, but there is a National Funders Collaborative similar to the census that is already working on redistricting. And this redistricting work is all C3 nonpartisan work. And much like the census, it's all about providing support and capacity to community-based organizations to make sure that they have a voice and a say in the process of how maps are drawn, to make sure that they can advocate for their communities so that the political representation really fairly and accurately represents and looks like their communities.
Yeah, and this is one where I'm always a little uncertain, but I will say that it's the state legislatures who actually will be drawing the lines. So, in some respects, Congress is not necessarily involved in that discussion. Though if you are a state that's losing population, you are going to potentially lose, like I think California is estimated to lose 2 congressional seats, and I think New York is going to lose 1. Other states are going to get them, but it's a really important thing for political empowerment and also redistricting is not only just about the congressional, it's many other offices are set through the reapportionment, including things like the Agricultural Commission, I think, and other offices that are not necessarily ones you first think of.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we have reached our time now. You will see on the screen, Manuela has put up a slide about the census resources. And we will be sending out a follow-up with this recording, the recording of this session, the link that you can share with others. And there's also a list of resources that would include links to go to these kind of sample messages and templates and toolkits that the Funders Committee has put together. So look forward to getting those. Pretty quickly, we should have the recording and have this follow-up email out to you, I think by tomorrow close of business. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all, Jocelyn, Stephania, and Sherry. And I think we should think about doing a touch base on this, maybe sometime toward the end of summer, so that we can keep foundations updated and sort of keep this going. Hopefully, once we can get back to maybe just 2 feet of social distancing, people will be paying a little more attention to an issue like the census. So thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, fill out your census form.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.